What do you talk about when you go to lunch with your coworkers? Well, you might talk about the weather. It's too hot, it's too cold, there's too much rain, there's not enough rain. We're never really happy with it, are we? You might talk about sports, even better when your team is winning. You might talk about work issues. What's going on in your world? Here's what's going on in my world. What are you working on? Here are my challenges. You might talk about your family. You might talk about your hobbies, your weekend plans. Give a little bit of a glimpse into your personal life outside the walls of the building. Now, if you're one of those people that eats lunch at your desk every day, perhaps by the end of this speech, I could convince you to go out, if not for the camaraderie and the networking, for the tortilla chips and the sushi. But there's another conversation that we could be having. We could be having a conversation that expands our minds, that opens our hearts, that heals our communities, and creates stronger working relationships. Instead of just doing lunch, we can do lunch differently. Sound lofty for a lunch goal? Well, let me explain. So it all goes back for me, July of 2016. I've always been a law-abiding citizen. Okay, a goody-goody. And I've always had the impression that if I was ever pulled over by a police officer, if I did exactly what was said, everything would be fine. Why wouldn't I have that impression? That's been my experience. Well, in July of 2016, the news were filled with some things that were troubling to me. Alton Sterling was an African-American who was shot and killed at close range while being held down on the ground by Baton Rouge police officers. The shooting was recorded by multiple bystanders. I didn't know all the facts and circumstances, but it bothered me. It really bothered me. And then the next day, Philando Castile, an African-American, was shot by the police in Minnesota during a traffic stop. There was a 4-year-old in the back seat, and his girlfriend live-streamed the video on social media. Again, I didn't know all the facts, I didn't know all the circumstances, but it bothered me. It bothered me a lot. And then the next day, here in my hometown in Dallas, another shooting. This time 5 police officers were shot and killed, reportedly by a man who wanted to kill white people, especially police officers. Again, I didn't know all the circumstances and all the facts, but it bothered me. And my heart began to hurt. It really began to hurt thinking about all the racial divides here in our country. And something in me began to stir. So whenever I don't really know what to do, I just try to take a step back and listen and to gain another perspective. And so my husband and I decided to go to church. Now, we weren't sure exactly where to go to church. My husband and I are Jewish, never been to church. So asking some of my colleagues about where to go, the name Potter's House kept coming up. And this was helmed by Bishop T.D. Jakes. Now, I never heard of T.D. Jakes, but of course now I see T.D. Jakes everywhere. So we went to church, and I have to tell you, it was one of the highlights of my life. So T.D. Jakes gave a very powerful sermon that day, and the whole speech was about redefining my hood. And what he meant by that was expanding our neighborhoods, that if we're only friends with the people that live on our street or the people that we went to school with, no wonder nobody understands each other. Really started thinking about it. My husband and I talked the whole way home, we talked the whole evening, we talked the whole next day, and started to think about it. Is our world wide enough? At my company, at AT&T, we have these amazing employee resource groups and employee networks, affinity groups to bring employees together. A wide variety, and what am I the most involved with? The AT&T Woman of Finance. Why? Because I'm a woman and I'm in finance. It's what I'm comfortable with. It's what I'm most involved with. So I made an effort and I got involved in a couple of others and expanded my hood here at AT&T. Then 2 months later, September 2016, the CEO and chairman of AT&T, Randall Stephenson, gave a very powerful speech. It was to internal employees, but it was recorded and it went viral outside in the world. And it was extremely powerful. And he talked about racial divides in our country. And he was asking us to dig deep and to understand our coworkers and to listen and to move from tolerance to understanding. Everything that he said spoke to me. I watched the video multiple times, at least 25 times, watched it with my husband, with my children, I sent it out, but I still wasn't even sure what to do. But I would think about his speech and I would think about the videos that I saw every single day. That was September. September went by, October, November, December, January. I still had no idea what to do. And then one night, at the end of January, I was perusing social media at night, and I came across this meme. And the meme says, a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, and an atheist walk into a coffee shop. And they talk and laugh and drink coffee and become very good friends. It's not a joke. Honestly, it's what happens when you're not a jerk. except it didn't say jerk. It had a different word that I had to cross out there. And I thought to myself, this meme is the missing link. And so I came in the next morning and I invited 5 colleagues to lunch who are different than me. And I invited a colleague who is Muslim. I already mentioned I'm Jewish, so a colleague who's Muslim. I invited a colleague who is gay, a colleague who is African American, a colleague who's Latina, and a colleague who is a Chinese immigrant. And I told them what I wanted to do, and everybody was so energized that we cleared our calendars and went to lunch that week. And we went to lunch and we talked. And I should note that I knew everybody, as I was the one issuing the invitations, but they didn't know everybody. And so I asked everybody, let's go around and introduce ourselves, not in the way we normally do at AT&T, not I've been here 23 years and here have been my jobs. Let's introduce ourselves in terms of diversity and inclusion characteristics. And we went around and did that, and we talked about our communities, and we talked about the lens through which we look through life, and it was magical. You could have heard a pin drop at this lunch as we were all focused and listening, and it was surprising to me about how deep everybody went so quickly. Look at everybody's eyes in this picture. Everybody's eyes is shining. Everybody's eyes are lit up. And I'm so happy that we had the foresight to take this picture to commemorate that special lunch. So we gave the initiative a name, called it DINE. Discover differences, include one another, navigate new perspectives, and eat. Now you can do a DIN if you want, but I highly recommend a DINE. Much more fun when there's tortilla chips or sushi involved. And I asked the people at this lunch, will you do a lunch? Will you do a lunch? Will you do a lunch? And I asked some other colleagues that I know here at AT&T, will you do a lunch? And something amazing happened. Lunches were planned. And more lunches. And more lunches. And the idea continued to spread and spread and spread through virtual lunches. I started to get pictures like this, something I had never even thought of. And more lunches were held. And a movement was born. Can you tell how we're similar and how we're different by looking at those photos? Guess what? Neither could we until we talked. So what's in it for participants? I can tell you as a participant, I have learned so much. I've done over a dozen of these lunches just in the past couple months, and every time I do one, I just want to do another one. I have a mental list of people that I want to invite to these lunches. By the way, people that I know and people that I barely know, just because it's a great way to learn their story. I've learned from my colleagues who didn't have enough to eat as a child. I've learned about a colleague who never slept on a mattress until the first time until she went to college. I learned about a colleague who was erroneously detained at a mall after a robbery because she was African American and they were looking for an African American. She was humiliated and detained erroneously. I learned about an arranged marriage one of our colleagues is in. I learned about religions that I didn't even know existed. My mind is expanding by the day at a time where I feel like some people's minds are just getting more narrow. And guess what? I talk about everything that I learn at the dinner table. So my family's going on this journey with me. I share everything, and the children ask questions, my husband asks questions. We're all learning about this together. What's in it for companies? I can tell you that here at AT&T, these lunches are happening all over the place, and people are feeling closer. Once you know about someone's background and you know about how they grew up, you feel closer to them. You know what they're struggling with. You know what their children are struggling with. You collaborate better. You work more closely. You seek out opportunities to collaborate with them. You're rooting for their success. You know what it means for them to be sitting in that seat. You know what they've sacrificed, what they're currently sacrificing. 3 testimonials I want to share of some emails that I got. I invited people from the floor I work on whose names I barely knew. We would nod and say hello in passing in the halls, but that was it. They were all happily surprised to receive my invitation to a DINE lunch. Everyone accepted and the conversation was powerful, insightful, and inspiring. Now I go out of my way to collaborate with them and engage with them. Second one, DINE has provided a vehicle to start the conversation of understanding with peers. From the experience, it's amazing what you learn from each other that you don't typically discuss in a regular business day. Until you have the conversation, you usually have no idea what they have been through or had to overcome. And the third one, At a large corporation, it's rare for colleagues to engage in probing conversations about discrimination, injustice, and personal struggles. Yet with DINE, such heart-to-heart conversations abound. We listen, we learn, we come to understand what previously was unknown or foreign, all in the context of a shared meal. Are you ready to join the DINE movement? Let me tell you exactly how to host a lunch. First step, invite 4 to 5 people to lunch who are different than you. You can send an email, just something like this. You can say, hey, I heard about a grassroots initiative called DINE. I think it's more important than ever in today's climate to think about diversity, challenge our own biases, get to know each other's stories. I believe many people want to, they just don't know how to engage in these sensitive conversations. The concept of DINE is that it's a one-time small lunch with just 4 to 5 people. We'll all invite people who are different from me, different in any way. We'll openly share about our backgrounds and the lens through which we view life. It's casual, everyone pays for themselves, and a great way to network and learn about each other on a deeper level. So send that to 4 or 5 people that you know, maybe even people that you only know their names, you don't know them too well. And it's important to note that I get acceptances to all of them, but there might be a time where I get one that somebody declines, and that's okay. Not everyone's ready for this conversation. So if you get someone that declines, invite somebody else. Don't take it personally. Once you get to the lunch, when you sit down, be the guide of the conversation. Tell everyone to leave their biases at the door. We all have them. We're all products of our backgrounds and products of how we were raised. Leave your biases at the door. We're just there to listen. We're not there to necessarily change anybody's mind over lunch. We're not there to convert anyone to a new religion. We're just there to listen and to understand. The way that I lead the lunch is I go first and share a little bit about myself just to set the tone. And then I ask everyone to hold their questions until everybody's had a chance to speak, because the worst thing is to run out of time and not everybody have a chance to share their story. So after everybody talks for about 5 minutes or so, then open it up to questions. And I found the most powerful question, the most effective way to start a question is to say, what's it like? What's it like to be in those shoes today? And it gets people talking. What should you talk about? Well, introduce yourself with diversity and inclusion characteristics that make you, you. Your gender. Perhaps you're a female in a male-dominated organization. Perhaps you're a male in a female-dominated organization. Your religion. Perhaps you're in a minority religion. Perhaps you're in a majority religion. What's that like? Your race, your sexuality, your country of origin. What's it like to be an immigrant to our country? But there's more to your story. So much more that makes you unique. Your socioeconomic status. Perhaps you were raised being food insecure. Perhaps you were raised upper class, never had to worry about it. Perhaps you were raised by a single parent. Perhaps you were raised by a grandparent. Your school life. Was school easy for you? Did you earn scholarships? Was school difficult for you? Was it really hard for you? And it's amazing how you got to overcome some of those issues that you faced. And your level of privilege. Perhaps you were advantaged because of the color of your skin. Perhaps you were disadvantaged by the color of your skin. All this goes into making you who you are. These are just some ideas, so much that you can talk about. Don't forget to take a selfie. I'm so glad that my colleagues and I had the vision to take a picture on that very first day. So take a selfie, send it to each other to commemorate. And perhaps at your company where you're doing this, there'll be a place to collect and a repository to keep track of all these lunches as well. What do I talk about? Well, my story changes depending on who's in the audience, but it usually has 3 different components to it. I'll usually first talk about being Jewish. I can tell you that anti-Semitism is alive and well. It hurts. It's confusing. It's hurtful to my children. It's confusing to my children. Talk about what it's like to be Jewish today, how that affects my community. I talk about being a working mom. I've always been a working mom. I love being a working mom. But the challenges that come with that, and some of the hardships and some of the joys that come with it. And then I usually talk about my upbringing. I was raised very middle class. Never a day where I worried where my next meal would come from. Never a day where I worried where I would sleep, if I was loved, if I was safe. Although my parents divorced when I was a teenager, still felt loved and supported by both my parents. It wasn't a matter of will you go to college, it's where will you go to college? But my husband's story is different. My husband grew up just above the poverty line. He did worry about where his next meal would come from. In fact, he benefited from a free lunch every day at school, and the shame that he felt with that. Everybody was surprised when they found out he wanted to go to college. He's since gone on to get his PhD, but it was a struggle getting there. So when we talk about how privilege plays a role in our lives, I can attest to that because my views have changed by being married to my husband and understanding the difference that education can make, the difference that socioeconomic status can make, and helping to make it an equal playing field for people to feel supported as they create their best life. So are you ready to join the DINE movement? Are you ready to engage? Are you ready to learn about your colleagues in a whole different way? Are you ready to work on the racial divides that sadly are prevalent in our nation right now? You may not be part of the problem, but there's a way to become more part of the solution. I really do believe that we can do this together. So what if we were to create a new meme? What if it said something like this? A Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, and an atheist? A Buddhist, a Hindu, a Mormon, and a Catholic? A veteran, a member of the LGBTQ+ community, a Native American, and an immigrant? A baby boomer, a millennial, a conservative, a liberal, a Caucasian, a Latina, an African American, and a differently abled person all walk into the workplace. And they work together, side by side, collaborate, listen, and tackle difficult issues by seeking to understand each other's perspectives and finding common ground. It's not a joke. Honestly, it's what happens when you stop to recognize the power of a single conversation. We can break down barriers one lunch at a time. Don't just do lunch differently. DINE.